Okay, I'd like to call to order the Policy Review Committee meeting for April the 3rd, 2025.
Oh, I want it on here.
We'd like to begin this meeting by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Inca, Kamak, and Silk people. And then we have the minutes of the February 6th, 2025 meeting minutes to be adopted. Period. First, yeah, that's Egan or Charlie and Egan. Pick your choice. Okay, so first up on the agenda, we have the sign regulation amendment bylaw. And I don't know if it wants to be introduced by staff, but that the committee recommends that the city sign regulation amendment bylaw 2395/2025 be forwarded to council, and proposed city of Merritt sign regulation amendment bylaw 2395/2025. I said that completely backwards, but that's okay. Does anybody? Yeah.
Just one housekeeping. Number 2, section 11.1. There are 2 sets. Please stand in front of your non-exceed 8 meters in height without finished grade except along the highway. For one extent. So it's double layered. It's except.
So my only question with this CO would be with this, are we just trying to amend it so we don't have a fee schedule because it will depend on the size, height, depending? Why isn't that?
So, sorry, what was the question?
So eliminating, it looks like we're eliminating the fee structure.
Yeah, so these amendments are basically to ensure that the sign bylaw is consistent with the fees and charges bylaw. So we have a section in the current sign bylaw which talks about fees and charges. We have taken that section to the fees and charges bylaw, so it won't be here in the sign bylaw.
Okay. So it just really depends on what people are doing and the style and the size and everything like that.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. It depends on where they're putting a sign. Sometimes sign becomes a sign development permit if the sign is near the highway corridors. In on those cases, we would require a Ministry of Transportation comments and their feedback and approval, essentially. For example, the TNV sign that was put up, the digital sign on the dual phase, that was basically sign development permit, which was circulated to internal departments, external agencies, and they require engineer drawings and stuff like that. So.
Yeah. So at what point do we have to get approval from Modi?
Yeah, if the proposed sign is within their controlled access, which is like 800 meters from
The highway?
their highway, they have a map.
Okay.
So it's like circular buffer from the highway. So it's one is on Devil's Way, and then the other one was on Okanagan Connector at the Gateway 286 side. So they have maps for that. So any signs or any development permit or any subdivision which comes within that controlled access corridor, that would require Ministry of Transportation approval.
That makes sense.
Because they want to control that access, and yeah, we want to know.
Okay, so any thoughts? Should we? So are we in agreement then to move this to council for consideration? Okay. Sorry, a resolution, yeah. Yeah. So then I guess all in favor, carried. There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so then what we have next on the agenda, we have the Development Approval Procedures Bylaw number 2388. So we have this policy and bylaw committee recommends that the City of Merritt Development Approval Procedure Bylaw 2388 2025 be forwarded. Okay, so the bylaw itself. So I guess with this one, this was that's where we were amending all the sections again, weren't we? CO? I'm pretty sure that we've seen this one. We had talked about this one. So is this more of a cleanup?
Yes.
But I think there was some question about maps. Was that this one about the maps? No, that was a different
So
one.
basically,
can
last
do it
time
live,
I
please.
got this forward to the committee, around the birthdays, our intention was to do the amendment in 2 rounds. But then we decided, after the legal discussion, we decided to bring that for the new development procedures bylaw. And then if we let the new one, that will be a more cleaner approach, to make the amendments. So we're basically, repeating the new bylaw, then bringing forward the new bylaw. And I can provide a brief summary about the amendment that we're suggesting or anything.
It is, oh, it's not on. Whoops. I'm gonna hit it twice.
Yeah, so in this, a new bylaw, it's basically to make sure consistency with the provincial legislation, which is basically local government act and community charter. And we have, if you have the red line version document, you will probably see the new things that we are bringing in. So there will be more, we will have each different type of applications like rezoning, development permit, OCP amendment. So that is a whole list of the different type of applications that we have in the bylaw. And then for each application, we have identified what sort of information or what sort of paperwork is required for each type of application. We have also provided some clarity regarding the reports that we receive with the development permit. For example, sometimes we have noticed that applicants provide an older geotech report, which was prepared in 1997, which is totally outdated. So we basically require an update, like latest report, which shouldn't be more than 12 months. And if somebody's providing us an older report, then we would require the same engineer to provide us as a memo that report is still relevant in today's time and conditions. So that sort of information we are putting in the new procedures bylaw.
So a development permit before, did they used to be good for 24 months, but now a geotech has to be 12 months old or less, or?
Yeah, so if somebody is applying, if somebody's submitting a geotech report, so that
Yeah.
report should not be older than 12 months.
Okay.
It has to be, so because sometimes we have noticed that if the report is too old and then the person who has signed on the report, that person is no longer available or he's basically disqualified from the regulatory body. So we have noticed that kind of cases. So we want to make sure whatever reports, whether it is a geotag, riparian, or any reports or traffic impact study or anything like that we receive, that is basically signed off by professionals, and those professionals are still in practice and their licenses are good and everything.
Questions?
I'll say before you.
Yeah, Councilor
See?
Charney.
So on number 6, minor development permit. So installation of patio or deck. So if you need to replace your patio because it's rotten, do you have to get a permit?
You have to get a building permit. I don't think so. Every patio or deck requires a development permit, but that depends on the scope of work that is. If you're putting like a huge patio or deck, which basically
If I just replacing your original patio,
then it would require a building permit, not a development permit,
okay.
but it depends on what scope of work has been done.
And what about someone for landscaping changes? So someone wants to take up their grass and put it in xeriscaping. They have to get a permit then also?
If they're making substantial changes in their landscaping, especially for multi-family or apartment type of buildings or commercial buildings, then we would want them to apply for landscaping so that they are aligning with, they should be following our zoning bylaw regulations or OCP guidelines. But I think for single family dwellings or single family residential, if somebody's just replacing their grass or something like that, then it wouldn't trigger like a development permit.
Okay, I have some housekeeping on it. Counselor, you can go.
Can I just pop into, I think when the patio in the building permit, it was over the
That's when we were talking.
0.6 meters.
The height?
600 millimeter height, right?
Yes.
So if it's a ground level,
Yes.
I don't believe it needs a building permit.
We had this last meeting.
Yeah, and whether or not it's
Yeah, but
connected
that
to the
wasn't
house and
in
stuff.
this one, so how come we've got something over there and then something over here?
Because that's specifically, that's regards to they're different. Technically, they're different departments, different streams, right? There's building and there's development. They don't always have the same bylaws, and we're trying to get their processes more aligned. So they may have different bylaws and different requirements under the building or the BC building code. That's what our building bylaws is focused on, is aligning with. So we don't necessarily have to have it as a development permit. Unless it's again, a huge thing that's taking up 3/4 of your yard and it's attached to your house and it's, gonna have a giant roof
Okay.
on it.
So we don't have to have a reference here to the building?
No.
Okay, okay.
I also like to clarify one more point about citing of shipping containers. I think in section 6A, number 5. I think we're probably gonna remove that portion because I think for that we need to do a zoning bylaw amendment first. So yeah, and we have to also do some additional research about shipping containers because we've been noticing a lot of property owners are putting shipping containers. Like currently, the zoning bylaw requirements are they have to have a building permit. It's allowed for temporary use, temporary amount of time, like 30 days. And then if there is a building permit is issued for a construction project, then the shipping containers are allowed. But we've been noticing that because it's affordable and it's a good way to get, it's a good secure, and that's why a lot of property owners are putting shipping containers. So we probably have to do some research and probably we have to check what other municipalities are addressing these issues. So
And some people are allowing them, some municipalities allow them, but they want them to be sided and to look like sheds rather than industrial shipping containers.
I
Right?
can
So
agree
people
with
do
that.
sell them that way. It's sort of that shed look. Because they are very secure, they're waterproof, there's not gonna be moisture in them, so people really want them. However, do they look attractive in people's neighborhoods? That's the question.
Yeah.
And the difference between residential and commercial areas as well, right? Downtown, we're seeing a lot of them come into the downtown area. They're very secure. I can see why people would want them at their businesses if they can't store everything in their property, like inside their buildings. But we just have to make sure that it aligns with the look and feel of the place that we want.
yeah, I mean, according to zoning bylaw, it shouldn't, if somebody's putting a shipping, it shouldn't be on the front yard. I think we have noticed some property owners are putting shipping containers on city's road allowance or in the front property, so that's not really allowed as per the zoning bylaw. So yeah, we're getting a lot of inquiries and questions regarding shipping
There's
containers.
also proper venting has to be
Yeah,
done correctly. You can't just go with the C vents. You gotta put a venting kit in
Somebody
it.
gets stuck in there.
No, fire hazard.
Okay.
So my question is, I read somewhere in this that there's 9 different development areas, 11 in town.
yes.
Shouldn't we list that?
That information is available online on the OCP document.
Okay, but
Yeah.
it shouldn't be listed in the policy, or
In the procedures bylaw, I don't think so it has to be there.
are there different prerequisites for each of those?
Yes,
areas?
so for example, we have forming character DPA for a multifamily. We have a geotech DPA, we have riparian DPA. So each DPA has their own guidelines. Some of the guidelines in the DPA are common, but for geotech and riparian, there are more strict guidelines in terms of developing those sites. So
Okay, thanks.
okay.
So I think on that,
I'm good. Oh, okay. So just a couple quick things, Pranesh. Earthwork permits. Are we still at 30 cubic meters for our earthworks?
Yes, that's correct.
So is that sufficient or is that not sufficient? I've heard some people complain that it's not enough. I've heard people say for a single dwelling, it's fine, but anything more than that, it's not enough. So do we have that cubic meters on a sliding scale, or do they have to, every time they move 30 cubic meters, they have to reapply?
No, I think it's just if somebody's moving more than 30 or more than equal to 30 cubic meters
Yeah.
of earth, then they have to apply for earthworks permit.
Okay. Have you run into much kickback on that? Like, is there some unhappy people?
Not necessarily. Have we? Yeah, sure.
Sorry about that. It's just, I've had several
Yeah, for
contractors
sure, yeah.
complain about it.
Yeah, so when you think about what our job is by and large, and this relates to the applications as well, when we want people coming to see the city to get guidance, we want to make sure that we're not interfering with neighbors' properties to any great extent. 30 cubic meters is roughly 3 large tandem loads, right? Which is topsoil for a yard roughly, right? So it's not as much as an excavation for your average foundation. So if you're digging a foundation, you're going to need an earthworks permit. It's set at a level that allows us to make sure that we're not creating big cuts in walls and holes that are going to impact your neighbors more than anything else, right? So this is really all about when we want people to come and talk to us about stuff. 30 cubes, I think, when you think about the landscaping side of things and what you can do with that level of stuff, topsoil in a yard, for instance, that's about the limit. You want people to be able to landscape things, right? But you don't want people cutting foundations without making sure they have other things first. So I think we talked about that a little bit before, is some of the builders want to see, 150 cubic meters. Well, 150 cubic meters, you can make a mess on your residential lot and have your neighbor's house fall into it.
Okay.
We don't want to be there.
Okay, I just wanted that explained a little bit better, that's all.
So
Thank you.
really,
Does that help?
Yes, fine for me.
then the intent of that is made to make enough so if people want to do nice landscaping for their yard or reseed their yard and flatten it out, that it's just
Yeah, I mean,
a small
your
amount.
basic little bit of work, but if you're gonna cut a whole bank down, right, and try and create a level spot, 30 cubic meters isn't very much.
No.
It's gonna get noticed, right? And when it gets noticed, you could have slide issues, you could have geotechnical issues, you could have drainage issues. And that's when we want people to come and see us, when things operate at the level, same thing with other permits, decks, development permits, those kind of things, when the public and or the people are at risk, and we have to make sure things are done right. Foundations are necessary, connections to houses, those kind of things, right?
One last thing. Thank you.
Okay,
Nash, just one question. The landscaping and conditioning of a development permit. We asked for that up front now, do we not? We get that fairly quickly, so we don't have to chase them after it's done. Is that?
Landscape security, yeah,
Yeah.
it is required at the time of development permit application.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
How recent is this change?
I think it's there since the zoning bylaw got adopted, since 2020.
Not according to other people in town.
So not every development permit would require landscape, like a single family wouldn't require, like if somebody wants to develop a single family house, does it require landscape security deposit, but.
If I could, Mr. Chair.
Oh, go ahead.
I think Pranesh is correct. It's been part of our bylaws and OCP and zoning for a long time. However, it wasn't always enacted properly. And so what's happened is, for instance, we've had multi-unit developments, which is where we would start to see those landscape permits where the work didn't get done and we didn't take securities. So that falls on the residents then through their taxes to pay for, so that's the sidewalks, that's the, putting in some grass so it doesn't look like a windblown disaster. So those are things that the residents, if we don't take those securities, we end up paying for through our taxation because we have to finish the work.
So are you suggesting that there's been more of a problem where housing developments have happened and they haven't put in sidewalks or greenery, so the city ends up having to do that? Yet they get an occupancy permit or?
Well, so this is where aligning the building and the planning department is really important
Okay.
because occupancy might have been given before all of the development permits were done. So we have buildings where clearly no landscaping has happened and yet they have occupancy. So we're trying to break down that silo of building inspectors. Previously, we're told just to go ahead and do their thing. But now aligning those two professions to ensure that we are getting things done before they get occupancy. So we do have buildings where we've had to go back and either chase them to do initial landscaping or we're going to have to pay for it.
Well, given the high
Because it's
cost
contract.
of everything and
It's
sometimes the
only
availability of
No. The thing,
parts, sometimes equipment, supplies and whatnot. Do we have the option to give temporary occupancy? with a follow-up. I know that that may not help, but the only reason I'm wondering is sometimes people struggle to get their buildings complete within 12 months or 24 months or
Mhm.
whatever. And so then there's a high cost of having multiple locations if they have to rent somewhere. So sometimes they need to get in and then they can fix the deficiencies, but maybe they're waiting for the weather to warm up to pour a concrete sidewalk or something like
And
that.
that's why securities are really important,
Okay,
because even if somebody's moved into a building, we still have some funds that require them to finish the work that
get
their
the
development
funds.
permit required of them.
Yeah.
And if they don't, then we use those funds to finish the work for them.
okay.
Yeah.
All
Is
right.
that,
So if I can close the loop on that, with the different functions in development services right now, we're making sure that before building officials provide occupancy, they're checking with development services over other permits that need to be completed. As it relates to outstanding items, and we've seen a few of these recently on a few developments that have been lagging on a little bit longer, where securities get to be an issue. If they want to do things, and it's right in our subdivision development servicing bylaw, if you want to have use of something before everything is completed, we can take securities, or we will take securities and potentially enter into a development agreement to make sure things get done. We generally wouldn't want to do that. The landscaping deposits generally apply more to the on-site stuff for a particular development. We're more worried about off-site things that are city property afterwards. So as it relates to any of the off-site works, there's a separate security going to be required. If it's not done and we want to start using that facility, we have to make sure that we have something to make sure that work gets done, especially the taxpayers' property. On their site, they have their landscaping deposit separately for that, because that's required landscaping for your on-site work, not necessarily your off-site.
Okay,
But the general rule is, in order to make things happen, and we've seen a lot of these since I've been here, where stuff takes forever or it doesn't get done at all.
Yeah.
If I got your money, I've got your attention. Right, so I think 120% that's in our bylaws right now is light. I've always gone 2 to 3 times to encourage somebody to get something done. Because that makes sure that they want to get their money back. 20% prices change. Next thing you know, it costs them more than their deposit. Over the last year, we found, I think it was better part of $80,000-$90,000 worth of deposits delinquent from 14-15 years ago for things again didn't get done. And then we've had to put the work into getting those converted into city coffers essentially, but we're not going onto people's sites to do the work. So it's a real project management exercise, making sure things happen the way they're supposed to happen, what everybody's agreed to. General rule of thumb is, if we have your money, we have your attention.
Yep.
Okay.
Any other questions then?
I got housekeeping.
Councillor Charney?
Okay, under definitions, state of title certificate, second line, legal description of and comma and.
Oh, okay, yeah, noticed that.
So
Thank
one
you.
has to go. On development applications, E, under 3, close the application that are, so it should be either applications
Mhm.
that are or application that is.
Okay,
Types of development permits, D. A signed development permit is required to install any signage in the highway quarter gateways, comma,
okay,
and get rid of the or. General terms and conditions of development permits.
I love how detailed Councillor Attorney is. Do you want to just provide that to Pranesh
Sure.
instead of going through it all? If you don't think it substantially changes the meaning,
Well, it does.
or the intent of the meaning.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's not, making those changes is going to change the intent of what the bylaw is supposed to say.
No, but you better have it correct English.
Yeah, so if you want to do those grammatical ones to just
Okay.
directly to Pranesh,
Okay.
because it doesn't necessarily change what the bylaw is supposed to say. It makes it
No, I
clearer what
understand,
it's
I
supposed to
understand
say.
that, but if it's a bylaw, it should be correct grammar in English.
Yeah,
The format should be the same.
Yeah, well, I didn't.
Throughout.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we go through these again before we put them on the agenda, so to make sure they're formatted properly and stuff, but
Yeah.
definitely send this to Pranesh.
Okay, well, I only have one more on
Do
this
you?
one.
Okay.
I just have one.
We're going for a while there.
I might as well just, no, I just got one more on this one. So on number 7, number I, otherwise, the development permit will expire, either a comma
Mhm.
or an and, no extension is permitted.
Okay.
So that's it for that one.
Thank you.
No, not on that, just that, no, no.
It's Charney light today. So on that note, I think we don't have any other questions, so I guess, we have a vote to forward this to council then? Charney and Egan, all in favor? All right. Asset management policy. So what do we have here? The asset, the council policy for principles and development to be implemented across all parts of departments of the city of Merritt. I think this seems kind of standard, but probably needing some update. So let's see.
So our
Yeah.
previous asset management policy is pretty light, pretty vague. And what we want to make sure as we're implementing our asset management software and our maintenance management software and developing our asset management financial plan, that everybody in the organization understands that it's mandated, it's not an option to participate.
Yeah.
And that we support that from the top. Right? It is coming from council, the value of understanding the condition and costs of our assets. And the financial recommendations around what we need to invest in those assets has to come from the top.
Wasn't that mandated part of the 2025 OCP and
It
something
is,
update?
it is in the OCP, it's in many things, and it does, having an asset management program, policy at the very least, is part of our requirements for our gas tax funding.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But we wanted to make it a little clearer. We're touching a bit on some of the ability to use natural assets. And just making it very clear to all staff that we all own asset management.
And protection of natural assets is
Mhm.
very important as well, so.
Yeah.
Councillor Attorney, did you have?
Well, I think it's gonna be a lot of work,
Yeah.
but 2 housekeeping things, just. So on number 3, the city will use components approach for an asset's major subcomponents. So major subcomponents modify assets, so it should be ASSET''S. So it's possessive. I know. Hey, listen, that took me a long time to figure out whether it was S' or S. That took me a long time to figure that one out. And number 12, when an asset is sold or traded in, comma, a gain or loss on disposal will be recorded.
I think the only other, sorry, only other question I had about the linear assets would be, I guess we're talking mostly about underground, like piping and whatnot, where you're talking about within block to block and whatnot. So would we have an inventory of like the aging infrastructure underground as part of this asset management plan? Oh, sorry, I thought it was on.
Myself off. Yeah, certainly. So we will, that's part of the goal. In some areas we know, so linear infrastructure, you're correct, is underwater or underground infrastructure, but it's also roads and sidewalks and pathways.
Yeah.
So we have a sense of when some of that was installed, certainly the newer stuff. Some places we don't even know what it is. Some places we don't know where it is. Because the as-built are not correct, we've discovered. And so that's the part about this that's really important, is that we don't, things we can't see, it's very challenging for us to assess. We do have some funding to come in and do, for someone to come in and do assessment of the underground.
Yeah.
And assessment of the roads.
Yeah.
So we've got a bit of funding from the province and UBCM to do some of that work.
Yeah, I think we found that there was some changes when we did the Boat Street upgrade.
Yes,
That
it was
there
not where we expected it to be.
Yeah.
Some people knew, people who don't work for us anymore knew that that's where it would be. But because the as-built for that last correction weren't filed anywhere anybody can find them, whereas this asset management program will, all that stuff will be digital.
Yeah,
So when people leave, it doesn't leave with them.
And this is a living document, so it's continually.
Mhm.
Okay.
As we decide, so when we're doing asset management, you know, the barrier most municipalities in particular have to asset management is that we haven't done a great job in the past of recording and understanding our assets. And it's a huge project to get all your assets into an inventory. And to understand what year they were put in, what modifications have happened, what they're fabricated from. So like what kind of pipes, what size is the pipe, what kind of valves, what size are the valves. And when we don't know that, that's very intimidating. So that's why all of this work is very, very ongoing, because we have to develop those inventories and we have to develop the details of those inventories.
Yeah.
We know when a building was built, but we don't know when perhaps a door was replaced. Right? And that's the stuff we need to keep track of. Because if we see something's not lasting, we need to know. You know, a truck, and if it's like a truck, if we know we don't want to replace trucks, but we're putting $5,000 or $6,000 a year into a truck that's 20 years old, we probably just want to buy a new truck,
yeah,
right?
that's 20% of the value that what you're addressing in this.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
really, this is a very iterative process because it's so big for us.
Well, sure.
And it's been
Yeah.
so it wasn't required, right? Most municipalities have their list of big assets, like they have this many kilometers of road. But it doesn't tell you anything about any particular kilometer of the road in a spreadsheet.
Or
And so
what kind of piping's underground or.
exactly.
what
So the
condition-
idea is to now be able to keep that into a database where we can map it, we can show, we can identify what needs to be replaced most critically. It'll be very, and the community will be able to see those reports now that we're like, these are the biggest issues. And this is why they're going into the capital plan.
Yeah.
And this is what we think they're going to cost based on current estimates. And then council has that.
Especially if you have galvanized pipe under the ground that's leaking that you don't know about, which could be contributing to our being 3 times the national.
Exactly,
The
and-
provincial average for water use.
I'll just say that the
Yeah.
director found in his neighborhood some leak. So this is the kind of stuff we're talking about, like
Just. He has a newer neighbor.
just on Monday, right? So
Yeah.
this is the kind of stuff where we need to understand what those things
Yeah.
are, and we need to see those as built, because what he found did not match what they thought was there.
Which is, yeah,
So,
alarming.
yeah.
Questions from anyone else? So I guess on that note, we'll move this to regular council, so. Egan and Charney, all in favor? There we go. Okay, so now we have the park access road naming. Go ahead.
I think we should talk about that after we talk about the street naming and addressing policy.
Okay, so if we're gonna, the street naming first, do we need a motion to
Anybody
change
have
that
that?
order? Can we
Yeah,
just? Okay, so we'll jump over to 4.5, street naming and address policy. So I think this is where we had the ability to allow sponsorship. Was that this one? No.
No,
So that's the next one. All right.
So the CO's been working on this, and we've actually had some really good discussions in senior leadership around naming things. And currently, we don't have a system for naming parks. We do have a system for street naming and addressing, which is, there are some parts of the community where it's trees, flowers, and some parts of the community where it's names of former council members. One of the things is that street naming, we have to have a very strict idea of what we're going to use, or a very firm idea of how we're going to name streets, because we have to do that quite quickly once we start doing development. Parks, it's a little bit less. So at this point, we're not suggesting that you put street naming and park naming together in the same policy, because we may have different ideas about, and we can take time with naming parks. Street naming, the director needs streets named and addressed as soon as there's subdivision and things happening, so that it goes on title. One of the things we'd like to just point out is, and I think we've seen this a lot in recent years, is that naming things after people doesn't always stand the test of time. So right now, that's the majority of our streets are named after counselors, and I think we just go kind of in order. On the list, is that correct?
No, it doesn't look like you go in order.
Oh, how do we do? Okay,
Yeah, it looks like it.
okay, so we're just picking things off the list.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, we can continue as it is, but council may want to think about future proofing how we name things. Because I think we've seen a lot of things come up around, you know, stuff we didn't know about people that makes them maybe not people we want to name stuff after. In the last decade, that's really become a thing, right?
Well,
So-
everybody has a different opinion about some of these things, and
Mhm.
even one of the ones, it's like, there's a lot of people who have been great community contributors over the years, and, you know, do we honor them with the bench? You know, do we need a whole street named after them? So like, yeah. Maybe we can have maybe a different naming policy and have some input, but anyway, I think,
So for myself, when we look at the statement, it says, streets in area A shall be named after former elected municipal officials, Schedule A. So myself, I would like to see that added to also include citizens of Merritt that have achieved notoriety that brings Merritt to the forefront. So Tim Croker, how many people have made it to the Olympics? Tim. Posabon, Al Byers, the Mulvey Boys, Eddie Beers.
Yeah.
Swedberg. People that have, when you say their name, people immediately know exactly who they are.
or historical reference, right?
Yeah.
Something where
but-
it's a major contributor
Yeah,
to the
so,
community,
you look at Roger Sloan. Every time he does well, he always says,
but he's from
Merit,
Merritt.
From
it's
Merit.
from Merit.
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Not just anybody like, Joe Brown, but somebody who has actually been on the world stage, the forefront. With the Mulvey boys, if you don't know, one of the Mulveys was removed from the NHL because he refused to be a goon. He ended his career because he wouldn't goon anymore.
Mhm.
That takes a lot of courage to do something like that. Al Byers, we wouldn't have rodeo if it wasn't for Al Byers, all this kind of stuff. So I would like to see that counselors and mayors and everything is great. It really is. And flora and fauna is great. I see nothing wrong with that. But every once in a while, it would be nice to honor somebody who has really made an impact in the valley. And that's where I'd like to see a change to. Because ultimately, like we talk about the ad hoc, how it goes. So I've been involved with street naming as a counselor before, and we just look at a bunch of names and we say, hey, we really liked what Counselor blah, blah, blah did. And okay, that sounds great. Boom, done. So that's how that gets there. It doesn't go alphabetical or anything else like that. But I would just like to see the opportunity to name it after somebody who's achieved something and been on the world stage.
I agree.
And also.
Or put your mic on.
Thank you. I just wondering how many streets we have available to name at the current time.
You were coming up right away.
Yeah. Yeah, so we do have, because of some of the new developments, we do have some streets that are coming online in the next few months, year.
All right. So yeah, we're gonna have a few. I've had a couple. I brought one to you that you deferred to the committee meeting just recently because I got to get going on it because emergency services needs
An address?
street names and addresses as things become public property. So this is something we can't really sit back on the street naming side. To frame up the process, we either need an approved list that we use ourselves when we're doing this, which is what's been happening, or we would need to introduce a process in which council, if they want to have a bit more hands-on on the naming of things, that we engage council at the time of a subdivision application and get this conversation done so we know what it's going to look like when we get there. So it's already made up. Does that make sense? If I bring it to you right at the end, when I'm ready to go name something and it takes 2 months, we need things done at that point.
I agree with what the mayor says. I think in conjunction with former councilors and mayors, that we have a list of historical figures or athletes who have made it onto the world stage. And anyone, as you say, who's made a large impact to this town. And so you'd probably have to have a group of people sitting down and having a bank of names to draw from.
Well, you also have to remember, we've also made a commitment with First Nations naming of these streets as well, right? So there would be the name of the street and then we would have the First Nations. Because let's say, no secret, I'd like to see the golf course entrance be Roger Sloan Way. I've already
Yeah, I
contacted
agree,
Roger the whole bit. But there will be no First Nations name for Roger Sloan. So I would talk to John up at NVIT to find out what that area was actually known as. And then the naming would be done that way. So just remember, we've made a commitment to start doing that with our street names, is having
Mhm.
First Nations
It's-
on it as
yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So I think, these are things where we can kill two birds with one stone. I mean, the golf course entrance is absolutely a no-brainer. I mean.
It's not a street, so
Yeah.
it's even less of a brainer.
Yeah, it's a thing. It's an entry. But I mean, it's a no-brainer. I mean, that's where he learned to play the game,
Mhm.
right? So, but when I think of, like you go through the museum, Priest, the gentleman who took all those pictures. All those pictures that we now have as reference. Had he not taken all those pictures, we would have lost a lot of our history,
Mhm.
a ton of it.
Wouldn't have any in my bar.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So there's all of these people that we.
Well, is Priest Avenue named after him?
Yeah, well, I would believe it
Yeah.
is, but I mean, it's just things like that. I mean,
Yeah. No, I think it's great that we have a bank of names. And, a reasoning why they're there, because you know what, 30 years down the road, someone may not recognize those names.
well, again, I think the question being here is how do you want staff to go ahead with this? Do we just give them a bank of names and then they decide how this goes, or does council want to have hands-on this?
CEO?
I just want to touch base on a couple of things. I think that, I think it's worthwhile having a more fulsome discussion about who's on the list.
Mhm.
Because there are former counselors that may not be appropriate to name a street after,
Mhm.
right? And there are former people in the community who may have done something great in the community, but later people learned something that
Yeah.
we're not happy about. And that's what happens, 10, 20 years from now, somebody's secrets come out of a closet and we've named a street after them. So what some communities will do is they will have a street name, like a legal street name, but they will do a sub name of, somebody's way, right? Like Albyer's Way, but it won't necessarily be the legal street name, so that if not that I'm saying, but I'm just using this as an example, but the junior hockey team that we found out after later on in their lives that they sexually assaulted some girl at World Juniors, right? Bet you their hometowns named things after them. Bet you they're regretting it. Right? So really making sure that these names are vetted by a committee, perhaps, of a community committee, with a reasoning. Like, I think it's a really good idea to understand what they did to contribute to the community.
Yeah.
Because you have counselors probably in this time that haven't contributed anything even to council, right? They've just been bodies in a seat that were
Seat one.
Impossible. That could never.
But make sure that people are going to be comfortable with those people. And then if you have, we have 5 or 6 names right now that we want to have in the bank, then staff will go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We get to the end of that, committee comes together again and identifies 5 or 6 people and why, and then those are available to staff, because we're not naming 20 streets at a time, I don't think. Right? We need a bank of 6 to 10 names of people who are truly deserving and that we're pretty sure we're not going to regret later.
I have 3 or 4 coming up in the next 6 months if everything works the way I think it is, right? If I may as well, the comment of future proofing this is very important, I guess, is you really want to probably find a place to make sure that when you put a name forward for a particular reason, that reason itself somehow lives in the forefront of what you're naming, so that anybody can see it in any time. Because one of the things that we've seen a lot in public lately is, that person or somebody sharing a name because they're a cousin and people don't understand and they just assume it's, somebody else or a family name for the wrong person. So if we're able to keep the context of the naming in the forefront, maybe there could be a list that we generate on some sort of a monument of this is where all this came from, or it's in our GIS in such a way you can click on something and understand the history of it. That way, when somebody does look backwards at it later, they understand the context. And if they go, well, so-and-so was a terrible person and shared the same last name, we understand it's this context, not that context. Right? It's the details, I think, that matter here.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, we don't want to be tearing down monuments or having to rename streets and everybody redo their
Yeah.
ID and everything because
Yeah.
we've made a mistake on what we've named something.
But you know what? Even if we vet to begin with, 30 years down the road, there could be something. So
You're right,
it doesn't
but that
matter
gives-
how diligent we are now.
Yeah, but it gives people an opportunity to be part of the process and to understand why you made the decision when you made it, rather than just make a list of, you know, counselors or a list of school teachers or a list of whatever, right?
Yeah.
When you're using people's names, the context, as the director said, the context is important for why you're making that decision. That it's this person in that family, not the person who was in jail, and it's for these reasons. And if something comes up later, you justified your reason now.
Yeah.
Right?
See, another one too, you probably don't even remember is Stephen Harrison. Played football for Edmonton or Calgary. Yeah.
And if I may, the reason for the context is so that you're not tearing down monuments later.
Yeah.
That you can
We get it.
clarify it, right? And we've seen that a few times over the last 10 years, so.
Yeah. So I think there's a value to maybe a small committee of council and community members to start generating a different way of naming things.
Well, as it sits, this list is quite long and we'll never, you'd never catch up anyway. I mean.
Yeah, but
we're
these
gonna name
councils,
every-
we're talking about other members.
No,
too.
no, but that's what I mean, is that this list is so long, like, I mean, I don't see a Croker Street in Merritt unless I'm wrong. But like, you know, Eric Croker was on council for a long time
Yep.
and I don't see his name being named
Yeah,
on the street.
you're right. We're never gonna get through all these names.
But that's my point, and I mean, you know, he was a big supporter of the Civic Center in the 80s.
So maybe
I mean,
his, maybe it's more important to name a street after him than it is to name a street after Councillor Edger.
Sure.
Who knows, right? And we have to make those decisions.
But that's all I'm saying is that, I mean, I think it would be good to have a discussion because there's people who have, you know, like, Mayor was talking about the Beers family with, you know, Eddie Beers, just different people that have lived here in the past that maybe were in the NHL or went to the Olympics. And I think that would be more meaningful to community members than just picking people who were on council or mayor
I mean, we have
8 years ago.
we have a long list here that you can delve into as you need to. I think this is a conversation that we have over the next little while to see how that would work by putting people's names in.
So I
But
think,
you need it fairly quickly, right?
Yeah,
Well,
but
if you're gonna have an impact on it, yes. The other way to look at it is if any particular council wants to put their spin on it and gives us 5 or 10 names that they want us to work off of, and when we run out of it, you know what I mean? It's subject to then a review every 4 or so years. I don't know, just throwing that out there. But right now the list is way too big and doesn't matter what I choose, somebody might be upset somewhere. But if the list is small and if we run out, we just bring it back and go, can I have the next 5, please? We just need some lead time so I don't get jammed up on addressing.
I found it very interesting to see some of these names. They were named after, which I never knew,
Mhm.
mayors and councillors. I never knew some of these streets. Kind of interesting.
Well, that's because they were mayors sometimes 90 years ago.
Yeah, I know, more than that. Yeah, 29.
so, the policy or the recommendation right now for the street naming policy is to move it forward for council consideration.
Yes.
I would suggest that maybe council wants to form a committee to review, to create a shorter naming bank. And the reasons for that,
Well, maybe we should just make that a motion now.
make that motion to
And
go
then
to
we move
council and be approved at council, even
because-
on, we could, no, but agenda went out, eh? Okay, we could even add that to have that committee struck on Tuesday.
I think it would be maybe more appropriate just to form a committee for street naming because we need a shortened list because this is interesting, but it's too long.
And on the bright side with the current policy, map pretty much splits on the cold water south being the flora fauna names, if I'm not mistaken. That's where the roads I gotta deal with in the near future are. The reason I brought the other road forward initially was there was an opportunity and it didn't match the existing, what we understood of the existing policy. So I can go right to flora and fauna if you want me to go that route to carry on with the ones I gotta deal with on the short term.
I think-
Right? It's just, you know, and it goes same thing with the park naming policy and whatnot. I mean, we're on that side of town right now with
Yeah.
new stuff, right?
I think it would be something, and then we could maybe have that committee decide for a more permanent name, but nobody's gonna live on that.
Can't change
Can't
names.
have a more permanent name later. You
No,
have-
but like, I think we need the committee so we can decide what the name would be, and I just based even on
I
the
think we
comments that
need
the
another
mayor said
committee. I think
earlier.
We should just come up with 6 names amongst council instead of.
I agree on that. Don't
Yeah.
make it complicated.
You could come up with those names and and your justification, and then you could leave it for 2 weeks before adoption for community members to comment. That also is a very valid way of doing it, a little bit faster. You know, it's lovely to do community engagement. It's not always timely or necessary. But if you say, hey, and we can put it in the paper that this is a bylaw that's before council. These are the names they put forward. Any comments on these names? Not, can you put another name forward? Any comments on these names?
Yeah.
Right? And if somebody wants to call and say, well, that person was my uncle and they did this.
Oh.
Right? They come off the list.
If you want to take the line out as well and not have the Schedule A and Schedule B, I guess that'd be the question. If we're moving in that direction to, 5 to 10 names,
Yeah, I think
we're then
that's
taking
silly.
that line out and
Yes.
just saying it applies to the entire city. So
Yes.
think about that when you're making a decision as well.
I think that's appropriate.
Well,
So,
I mean, right now, it just says that we send it off to council, but I just think that the list is too long. and
so
I
you
think
could
that we
change
should-
that recommendation to
I
be
think we
that
should-
council, you can send it to council for review.
Yeah.
As it is, and then have this discussion at council.
Cause I think it
Yeah.
would be nice for a few of us to come up with some names as suggestion, and then we could vote on it.
Or they could add more if they wanted.
Or they
If
could,
we're
yeah,
gonna put it out to public.
no. I think we could probably come up with the name with the list and discuss it with the committee and then get
I don't
input
think we
like what
need
the
another
CS,
committee. That's the whole thing.
Yeah, I don't think we do either.
I think we
Somebody coming up
do.
with 4 or 5 names, and there's a whole list to pick from, plus the other ones that the mayor suggests.
So the only procedural thing is, how do we come up with our other names? Do we just ask council members to support, or are we asking for public input too?
No,
That's why I thought-
As the CAO suggested, we come up with the names, put it out there and ask people what they think of those names.
Okay,
See whether how positive or negative it is.
See if anything, see if anything comes out that we're not expecting, that you need to deal with.
Which is great, but that's what she was saying, that if we're gonna sit down and come up with that, a small committee and just to sit and hash it out so that we can get it decided in the next 2 weeks or whatever. and-
But I do think getting a committee together will be challenging. I do think that it's reasonable to say, this is the 6 that council's come up with. Is there anything that community wants to say
Well,
about this?
committee, I was thinking with the
Committee of
council committee.
Just the
right?
committee of council.
And just
Yeah.
discuss it and say, what do you think of the naming policy and these names?
Mhm.
Is where I was going with this. I don't know what Councilor Charney thinks, but
I just don't want it to be complicated and dragged out.
Exactly.
like how long it took us to come up with colors for one of our flags in the last council term, how it kept going on and on and
Yeah,
on.
see, that's what I don't want.
I think even this could be you could generate the names individually.
Yeah.
And send them to the CO and I,
Perfect.
and then we can generate a list that we send out to you guys. For comments, and then we formulate a
Short
final
list.
sort of short list that can go to council for approval, first, second,
Yeah.
third reading. 2 weeks before adoption, you'll advertise it.
So then we've always got the fallback of your flower and fauna, and you've got the fallback of councillors and mayors.
Yes. but
So
that-
you've got a wide bank if
Yeah.
we submit other names too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The other thing I might suggest, you guys probably know more about this end of it, but if the policy talked about a schedule that is updated from time to time, possibly as a policy, does that work? Does it, or does the schedule have to be attached to the bylaw?
We'll have to-
If the bylaw
we'll have to
stands
think about
alone,
that. We'll
just a
think on
thought.
that.
That way it's less pomp and circumstance when you do want to do something, where it's not necessarily a bylaw. then,
Yeah,
but-
we'll think on how to best formulate that, so it's not necessarily
Okay.
renewing the bylaw every time.
Yeah.
Sorry, my phone is.
So I guess on that note, we'll just move this to council with
For further discussion.
further discussion of the names that we want to have. And then,
Yeah, so we'll maybe send an email out to council saying, hey, start thinking about a few names. We'll generate a list. We'll put it down to a short list.
maybe we can attach these pages in the email so that
Yeah,
people
they
can
can see
review
the
that
policy.
list.
And we can shoot to have this back to you, beginning of May
Yeah, and then we can just
with your
make
short
a
list.
decision.
Is that okay
Not
for
short
you?
bus,
Nate?
short list.
Yeah, if the one I've got, when it goes into service in and around June, I'm gonna have to get a name on it, but I'm gonna keep it out of service till then, because we're still working out there,
Yeah.
so.
And that gives us those timelines to go in May, sometime in June, end of May for the 2 weeks. We should be good for June.
Okay. So all in favor of setting this for review? Okay, carried. So now I guess we'll be back to 4.4, park access road naming. So I mean, we were just talking about all this and the naming of the roads, so I guess
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
this particular case, are we trying to decide if we're gonna call that Newman Parkway?
I think you've dealt
Have
with
we
it
beat this to
essentially,
death?
but yeah, and I think our only other thing is that parks, naming actual parks, we're developing a procedure or policy for that currently, bylaw for that, policy for that. So
So can this be, can we
This-
make a motion then that will bring this to council?
I would just say not referring it to council.
Not referring it to council, okay,
Yeah, at this point, I would not want to see anything at this point.
So just
named-
vote against it.
okay,
Yeah,
Oh,
Newman Parkway at this point.
Oh, don't have a resolution.
okay.
Don't even do it.
Yeah.
So we'll
No
just leave it
resolution.
off the list?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay,
Please.
do we, you want?
No,
a motion
it's just off the
leave
list.
it
So
do we need a motion to remove it then?
Nope, you just don't move it.
I
So
think
do you need
we don't need to have a resolution.
you don't need even to remove it from the
No,
agenda?
you just aren't doing anything with it.
Okay.
Cause I think you kind of came up with what you want to do with the street naming, so.
Great, okay. Wow, now we're into 4.6 naming rights policy. So I guess this is what I was kind of thinking of earlier, where we were looking at possible sponsorships for the names with
Mhm.
financial contributions being
Mhm.
made, so yes, questions on that?
I don't have any questions. I just think it's a great policy. And I think it's long overdue.
Callan does it, it's great.
And I'd like to just thank our community services manager. This is her first major policy that she's put together for us. And she did a great job and did a
Yeah.
ton of research. So I'm super happy with how that turned out.
Yeah.
And we didn't have to take it out to get somebody to do it externally, so.
When you see other municipalities having, like the arena in Kamloops being sponsored, so
Kelowna everywhere, Vancouver.
Yeah.
They're all sponsored.
they're all sponsored. and It's a great way to generate
Yes. I mean,
non-tax
arena.
revenue.
Cool.
Yeah, just to be clear, though, the naming company has no rights to how
Decisions,
everything
yeah.
works inside. It's
No.
just it's a tax write-off.
Okay.
But the city still retains ownership and still operates.
They get nice advertising
it's mentioned
and
in-
shiny mentions everywhere in photos.
Mhm.
So do we have a motion that the review committee recommends naming rights policy be forwarded to council for consideration? First, seconded by.
I just have one question.
Do you want to second it and then we can have the
Yeah,
question?
Questions?
The approval of naming rights will not result in additional cost for the city, excluding the city's approval process. What happens if we have to put up a new sign?
That's part
pay
of the
for it.
Part of
cost.
they pay for
Yeah.
that.
Oh, okay. Okay,
Because like I say, Councillor, it's a tax write-off. Everything they now do after that, they get a tax write-off.
okay, perfect. Oh, great. And on the very last page, there's one little extra zero there. You got 10 million instead of 1 million.
Maybe
For the-
somebody'd like to
for
give
the
us a
diamond.
million, you don't know.
Maybe it is.
For the diamond zero. For the diamond.
So that's the diamond sponsorship. It should be 1 million and not
1
10 million.
Hey, maybe they want to give 10 million.
What needed.
A zero makes a big difference.
All right.
In that context, it sure does.
Yeah, and I really like the fact that you can go in and they could just sponsor something. Like maybe they want to sponsor the place where you buy your food, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Such and such
Cafe.
grill.
Yeah. And I think this is really important as we're talking about, particularly for the pool and the arena and the volume, the sort of the scope of the retrofits for those two aged buildings. This is a way for people to contribute, small or big, right?
Yeah.
You could be a small contributor of $1,000 or $100, or you could be a big contributor of $100,000. And it all goes directly into supporting the retrofits of those buildings.
So that's an interesting thing because up at the hospital, they've got them, is it still there?
The sign,
Little
yeah.
They've got them listed according to how much they've given. So would we be doing that
Yes.
somewhere at the actual facility or somewhere in City Hall?
I think at the actual facility, we haven't fleshed that all out yet. And there are places where plaques still exist from the original sponsorship, so we will do something with those as
The
well.
pool
Yeah.
still has their gold, silver, bronze donors.
Yeah.
As you come in the
Yeah.
deal there.
Okay,
Yeah, that's right. Urena does as well, yes.
We need to recognize even those people who donated 50 years ago to facilities, right?
Okay, then, so we've move that to council then, because we have the first, seconder and accepted. We're all in favor, right? Okay, great. So then 4.7, user group advertising policy.
So, we don't have an advertising policy for user groups who want to act. So the Centennials currently have the advertising in the arena, but we don't actually have a policy for it. It's previously, we didn't even have a contract for it that we could find, but it kind of got wrapped up into the last contract that we did with them when they changed to the KIJHL. I feel like I left the letter out there. Yeah, JHL. So I might have left a letter out.
That's right.
Okay, good. So we have other groups that would like to do advertising. However, when we're talking about advertising on public land, we have to have an agreement. Right? Just like we did with the sign, we don't want to see inappropriate advertising. We kind of want to know what that advertising is going to. People want to give infrastructure to the city that we might not actually want to have because we can't afford the maintenance and the operation of that infrastructure.
Yeah.
So just because somebody wants to advertise and raise money or do something doesn't mean that it's going to help us. So understanding what is the value of the advertising, if a group is using it as a fundraiser for for a team, or what is the purpose of the advertising and what is the benefit to the city? Should the city be getting some revenue from that advertising, given that it's public space that would benefit the whole of the community versus only one group? So those are some of the things that we have to work out. And because we don't currently have a policy, our recommendation is that we develop a policy.
Well, in the past, I think all the advertising that happened in the arena stayed with Centennials, but I think now it'd be nice to see what the costs that we could maybe
Who brought
recover.
in the closed circuit advertising? Was that the Centennials? Came up on those TVs? Cause I bought into that one.
Mhm, mhm.
Well, the other thing we have, if you go to last year, I think it was last year when the provincial junior boys softball team was here. Along the fence was all the advertising flags.
Yeah.
So there was, everybody paid to put that flag up. We need to know what happens with that money.
Yeah,
Does it just simply go to the softball association for them to do what they want with it? Or is there a certain part that comes to the city? Because actually it's on the city's property,
just gonna say
taxpayers'
that.
property. Do we take a certain amount? Or
Did
if,
they even ask if they could do that?
this is why this is here.
this is why this is here.
okay, so then that means all advertising goes through the city, not the individual association.
And that's the other option, is that you could say there is no user group advertising. It all goes to the city and the city determines what happens with the funds. right? And you can say, you know, this is the breadth of these things that you can consider. You can say that advertising goes directly into, any advertising revenue goes directly into our recreation reserve. Or any advertising goes into our recreation operating budget, right? So that it doesn't get lost in general revenue. But those are decisions you have to make. If you want the city staff to deal with advertising, absolutely 100%, Alex's team can do that. If you want to allow user groups to deal with the advertising, what is the benefit to us as a community versus that user group?
Well, I think that it should be a combination. So like take the softball or baseball, whatever it was. A portion goes to that organization and the rest goes into a recreation fund.
Well, I think also too, there should be options. Let's say we're gonna talk about, it happens at the pool when they have their meet as well.
Mhm.
So let's say, let's just use softball because this is where we're at. And they get a certain amount of money, but if that association is willing to pour that back into the field for upgrades, do we want to go in that direction? Or do we want to take certain percentages or take the whole thing and then give them, you know, this is why we're having this
But
conversation.
you
Well, I
then,
also think they were using it as a fundraiser.
yeah, that's why I was saying a portion goes back. But the problem with that one though, Mike, is parting go back into the field. Then does that mean the arena and the pool have a different policy? So it should be a standard policy for all facilities. So yes, it could go back into that facility via the recreation committee.
Well,
This is why it's coming to you because you
Yeah.
need
We're
to
gonna-
decide.
we're gonna end up having to maintain everything anyway, so really, if
Yes.
it's all recreation, it's gonna come out of the same budget pot anyway.
Well, it should go
And-
back
and-
into that pot then, not,
Well,
a portion should go back into the organizing group and then the
So-
rest.
And that's really what we gotta, you have to make some decisions about this, because if somebody's making $100,000 on advertising.
Where's it going?
What's it going to? Oh, we're saving it because we're gonna buy a digital scoreboard for the ball field. Okay. But who's gonna maintain that scoreboard? Who's gonna pay for the power for that scoreboard? Who's gonna make sure that it doesn't get destroyed by some kid, right? Like,
Mhm.
these are the things then, when they put something up like that in our public facilities, it now belongs to the city of Merritt. And we're responsible for maintaining it. So you have to know what somebody's plan is, if they're using it as a fundraiser for their team to travel to a tournament or to buy equipment versus a fundraiser to develop city infrastructure. Those are very different things, because the impact to the city and to the ratepayer when we have infrastructure that we're not ready for can be pretty, that can be problematic.
yeah,
It's like building a new building and saying, hey, we built this building for you.
yeah. Well, we had the same kind of question come up when we had to have something cleaning for the handprints of the Walk of Stars a few years ago too, right?
Mhm.
Because some of them were damaged or needing cleaning and different things, and
Well,
That's why I had
I think we
questions.
also have to look at it, like, let's say somebody is a smaller group and they do some advertising and they make a couple of $100 because it's a fundraiser for them. Well, what's the point of us asking for anything? You know what I mean? But as the CEO said, let's say they make $100,000.
Mhm.
That's a different conversation.
So then you have to have a
I think you need
monetary
a-
limit
I
on
think
it,
you need
a
a
threshold.
threshold.
there could be a threshold.
Yeah.
Under-
Or you think about it as, sorry, this just popped into my head. You think about it as, if we get the advertising revenue, that means we can keep rates lower.
Yeah,
So those groups don't have to pay as much for facility use, or we don't have to continue to raise their rates to hit. If our target for revenue return in recreation is 30% or 25%, whatever council wants to set, then we don't have to raise those rates as much if we're getting money back from advertising revenue, right? So there's a lot of ways, and we're just gonna maybe bring you some, if council would like, we could start doing some research on this and bring you
Yeah.
a few different schemes. And then you can kind of choose which one you think works best for
Or
our
you can
community.
give the groups different options.
yeah, well, that's what they're doing right here.
Yeah,
Let staff
and
be
then-
directed to bring forward a community group advertising policy, so then we can see what the different
Yeah,
options are.
and then, you'd send this policy to their committee, like to the recreation committee, because the other thing is that if somebody wants to advertise, but nobody else has been given that option, how do you do that, right?
Okay, well, I know that last year there was the women's fastball that was raising money for the local slow pitch or the local junior softball. That's where all that money went to.
Yeah, we have no idea about that, yeah.
Yeah,
And so again, public
Because it was
use,
a ladies fastball tournament.
yeah, so use of public facilities for advertising, but we have no idea where the money goes. We have no idea, what you don't want to be in a situation is where somebody's advertising and that money ends up in somebody's bank account.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, that's, but I mean, we do have a little bit of a precedent set with the Centennial, someone's on the board,
Yeah.
right?
And we
Yeah.
know that we have to have some serious discussions about that.
Because that comes back to them to keep them in operations. So yeah, I think what you suggested is staff start to cobble something together and then council can start talking about it. 'Cause-
Yeah, find out what other communities are doing about stuff like that too.
So I guess we can direct staff to bring forward the advertising policy for
Yeah, we'll
a
start,
future meeting.
yeah, we'll start bringing each stuff, like we'll put a package together of potentials and then
Yeah,
we'll
yeah,
go
yeah.
on to drafting.
First, second.
You second that,
Charney and Egan, all in favor? Just so we can get through this meeting. Okay, and then 4.8, we have the Economic Development Advisory Committee Terms of Reference, which I think is great, and thank you for the work on that. Nice to see something on the agenda.
And this I would ask is separate from the roundtable where all the user groups came to. Okay.
So I think that there's value in reviewing, so this is the original terms of reference from the last time a committee sat. And I think there's value in reviewing, who you want on the committee. Numbers, you want 11 voting members? Do you want 3 members of council? Do you want have an opportunity to have a look at that? Are we inviting the electoral area directors?
M&N.
Yeah,
What that
MNN.
has, yeah.
Don't you think TNV should be on this if they're going to be our marketing?
I think that might be a conflict of interest. To be honest, yep.
I don't,
I think what we need is we need people who,
don't work for you.
yeah, they will be working for us. So I think that would be a kind of a
You aren't
a
making
bad
money.
idea.
Yeah.
No, I guess the other thing though, is this by advertisement or can the mayor sign?
So,
I think the mayor should sign.
It was a little quicker when we do it that way.
Yeah,
yeah,
Because if we do the advertising, I mean, I already know 3 or 4 people that have stepped forward saying they'd like to be on it.
and you can advertise and go out and solicit people at the same time. And then they put their names forward and as they put their names forward, you appoint.
Because this will be our second kick at this can. right?
Yeah. And we'll probably have to try a third before we get a really strong committee together.
Okay.
But we will keep trying.
So yeah, advertising, I guess that's where we'll go.
Yeah, and you guys know who you also want to approach, so
Well, they've approached me. So.
yeah, so just get out there and
Yep.
find
No
the
problem.
bodies.
Yep. Okay.
And so if we're relatively happy with this, then
Yep.
we'll get to it.
Looks good to
Do you
me.
need a vote on that? No, not really.
I think this is the current, so if you're happy with this current terms of reference, we'll bring this terms of reference to council on Tuesday.
I think that looks.
I think 11 is
Oh.
too many people.
You're not
Oh,
gonna get
council's already approved it. Sorry, previously. This is the current,
I'm looking at it again.
I think we'll have to adjust. I'd be surprised if we got 11.
I mean, a maximum of 11.
Yeah, maximum. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? So if you only get 8 or 9 and you feel comfortable with
Yeah.
that, you can sit there for a while.
Can I ask why we have the electoral areas, guys, there?
I think my perception of this is that when we talk about economic development in the city, we have to consider a little bit of the a certain
Yeah.
distance outside the city, because businesses that happen in there, that, let's say it's a 50-kilometer range into the TNRD, businesses or industry that happens out there probably leads to more residents in our community and more spending in our
And
community.
therefore the First Nations should be
That's another option.
Be part of
that-
your MOU.
MOU? Okay,
Sure.
okay.
That would be one of the hammers in the MOU. Because that's, once you get to an MOU, the whole idea is how do you work together as a group and also economically, right? So the whole idea is to work together to have economic benefit for both groups. So that would be more of a MOU.
MOU.
Yeah.
But at
Fine.
least as a terms of reference, it seems reasonable and.
So, but the electorals are not on the MOUs. They're,
No, and I mean, Cynthia does have a point. Let's say, I mean, there for a while there was an arbitrage wanting to be put in here. That would have never gone in the city. But they would probably have done quite a bit of business in the city. TNRD directors are fairly busy. They may not have time to show up. They may. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you, I sit on TNRD as a community rep. Sometimes I wonder why I'm there. I'm voting on a water main in Blue River.
Yeah.
Why do I have any right to be voting on that? Because I sit on TNRD, but if I say no and I carry 5 votes and they don't get it, who am I to say that, right?
Yeah,
So for me, I always refer to the director in that area. How would you like me to vote? Yes or no?
Mhm.
And then I vote the way they ask me to. So I think it would be good for them to be part of that if they chose to be. They may not.
Yeah, and they can just drop in because they're not voting members, or
Yep.
we could ask them specifically to come to a meeting because we might be saying, hey, you know, like for instance, the recent site selection request that we had from the Ministry of Jobs, Economic Development and Innovation. I'm not sure if I can just say Jedi. That we didn't have the land within the municipal boundaries that they were looking for, but that doesn't mean that we didn't have it in close proximity to the municipality, which would have led to increased economic development in the community, right? More housing, more people, more
Yeah.
groceries purchases, more trips to the restaurants, that sort of stuff.
Well, you look at Valley Grays, right? I mean, they have several people out in the TNRD that contribute to their business,
Yeah, right.
that are home-based or cottage businesses, right? So,
Yeah.
So I think it would be prudent to have the directors involved.
Would you all agree with that? So we'll just, if you're happy with this still the way it is, it's already approved, we can start getting out there and working on this.
advertise it, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, we don't have any information items, so I guess we're at the termination of the meeting.
Great, thank you.